The DA may have just seized a secret weapon that will allow them to take control of the major metros after next year's election. Here's how. Following all the chaos that ensued in the KZN provincial legislature's motion of no confidence, the DA and its allies emerged victorious. And during this dispute, the DA may have unknowingly unlocked a secret weapon that will allow it to take control of the major metros in next year's municipal elections, among other municipalities across the country. But before we get into it, could I please remind you to subscribe to the channel? It's completely free, and all you've got to do is click on that subscribe button below this video. Also, consider becoming a member of the channel to show your support and enjoy some additional perks. Now let's begin. So the chaos I'm speaking about in the KZN legislature is whereby KwaZulu-Natal Premier Thamsanqa Ntuli managed to survive his motion of no confidence amidst pretty harsh protests by the MK party. So as we can see from this KZN government article, Premier Thamsanqa Ntuli successfully weathered a motion of no confidence brought against him by the Umkhonto weSizwe party at the KwaZulu-Natal legislature today, maintaining his position as head of the provincial government despite dramatic disruptions in the chamber. So those of you who may have seen the videos online would have seen how the MK party members all got up from their seats after the result of the vote was announced. A lot of them started to rush at the Speaker of the House in what seemed to be quite an intimidating situation, so much so that the police actually had to get involved and disperse the crowd. Now, Ntuli, as it explains here, condemned the behavior of the MKP members who disrupted the sitting, saying it was regrettable that those who initiated the motion had sought to undermine the legislative process itself. The vote against Ntuli followed several weeks of political maneuvering in the province. The MKP, which emerged from the 2024 provincial election with the largest single-party representation in the 80-member legislature, lodged the motion of no confidence, citing concerns over governance and provincial performance. Despite the MKP holding a strong opposition presence, Ntuli's position was bolstered by continued support from key government of provincial unity partners, including the IFP, his own party, the ANC, and the DA. In the lead-up to the vote, the DA publicly affirmed its support for Ntuli, denouncing the motion as destabilizing. Ntuli, who has served as Premier since June 2024, following the 2024 provincial election, retains the confidence of the GPU. So something that the article actually left out is that the GPU doesn't only consist of the ANC, the IFP, and the DA. There's also one seat belonging to the NFP, the National Freedom Party, which a few years ago splintered off from the IFP. And that one NFP member was actually the deciding vote because the NFP member voted in favor of backing Ntuli. And so something that the DA may have just realized is that it can leverage this relationship that has built in KZN with the IFP and the ANC on the national stage. So the way that the DA can actually end up governing all of the major metros in Gauteng and many across the country is actually by entering into a partnership with the ANC and by a smaller extent, the IFP. Now, of course, this doesn't seem like an ideal situation for the DA because after all, the ANC is at fault for a lot of the corruption and mismanagement in government. However, it might be the DA's cleanest route to actually getting into power. And we're going to see this through data. So, Colonel Chris Wyatt was kind enough to put up some of the DA's internal polling figures from earlier this year. A big shout out to Chris Wyatt. Please make sure to go over and subscribe to Chris's channel as well. He certainly does produce a lot of interesting content. Now, if we take a look at the DA's internal data, this is from August, we see that the DA has emerged as the largest party in Johannesburg with 40% of the vote. The ANC comes up with 23% of the vote, so a 10-point drop from their previous election result. The MK party then emerges with 7%, and Action SA is the surprise package with 12%. So what's really interesting here is that the EFF pretty much crumbles entirely in Joburg. And if we take a look at the DA, they really only need another 11% in order to build a coalition government. But this becomes quite difficult, you see, because if one was to assume that they don't want to work with the ANC, we know that they generally aren't fans of the MK party, and that wouldn't get them over the line anyway. They'd probably still need help from other smaller parties as well. And Action SA would actually give them a clear majority. But the problem is that Action SA and the DA definitely have a lot of beef between them. You know, they used to be in the multi-party charter together. But the problem came in Tshwane when Action SA decided to launch a motion of no confidence against the DA Mayor Cilliers Brink, and that motion succeeded. And so there's a lot of bitterness between the parties. It's very unclear as to whether they'll ever be able to restore trust between them in the future. And so I'm not entirely certain if a deal could be struck there. But then if you are to exclude the ANC, MK, and Action SA, there's really not a lot of places to go. The Patriotic Alliance and the DA also have a lot of beef. We've seen how back when Mayor Mpho Phalatse was in power, the Patriotic Alliance was able to bring down the DA government in Johannesburg and hand it over to the ANC. And so there's also a lot of distrust there. The Freedom Front Plus and the IFP have proven to be pretty reasonable, stable allies for the DA, but they don't seem to be coming up in this poll. And we also know from the past that they are parties with very small percentages in Joburg. We're talking about 1%, 2%, that sort of range. And so if the DA was to bring them as well as the ACDP, another ally, into the mix, they still wouldn't cross over 51%. So it really seems that in Johannesburg, the DA could remind the ANC of how they stood by their side in KZN and how there's, of course, the government and national unity. And perhaps together they could form a stable governing coalition with the IFP, because after all, the IFP could sort of bring that extra accountability to the mix. And they are known to work pretty well with the DA in KZN. So perhaps they would be able to bolster the DA's activities in government. Moving on to the city of Tshwane, and this is where things get really interesting. So according to the DA's polls, they would get about 48% of the vote, making them the clear front runner in this race. The ANC is expected to get 27%, and then you have actually the Freedom Front Plus with 9%. They've always had Tshwane as a sort of stronghold for them. You then see MK and EFF each getting 7%, but it is important to note that when it comes to polling, not only can it be inaccurate, of course, but a lot of the time the DA tends to overperform in polls and then do worse at the actual election. The ANC is the opposite. They often seem to underperform in polls and then do better at the election itself. So it's not to say that this is guaranteed to happen this time around, but it is something to keep in mind. Now, if we were to assume that these percentages are correct, well, the DA's path to victory is pretty clear. You just need to get the Freedom Front Plus's help. But if, for whatever crazy reason, the DA and the Freedom Front Plus are unable to work things out, of course, the DA will need the help of other parties. They could be the Patriotic Alliance, although they don't have much of a support base in Tshwane, or the IFP or the ACDP. But again, these parties don't really have very big support bases. Still, the highest probability is that the DA will sort something out with the Freedom Front Plus to get over the line. So Tshwane isn't really the sort of place where a DA-ANC partnership will even be needed, looking at the data, but one never knows how things can work out on the day. Moving on to eThekwini in KZN. Now this really hits close to home, especially given the KZN motion of no confidence. So if we take a look at this data, it's expected that the DA will surge in support, actually by 18 percentage points to 44%. That means that they're just 6 points shy of a majority. The ANC would only be able to get a meager 14% of the vote, whereas the MK party is expected to get 31%. Coming up on the rear is the IFP with 8%. Now, the DA's path to victory here is pretty clear. get together with the IFP. That will give you 52% and a stable coalition. The problem, however, is that if the DA and the IFP get together, the ANC might also want in. After all, they are together in the Government of Provincial Unity as well as the GNU. Now, a lot of people might think that this is a bad idea to allow the ANC in, but the parties may have little other choice because they understand that other partnerships are also on the line. Of course, there is also the question of government stability. If one was to only have the DA and the IFP, well, 52% is not a very big majority. And when it does come to any potential friction that could arise, any one of the parties pulling out would mean the collapse of the government. But if you did bring in the ANC, at least that would add to coalition stability. So we know that this is a far from ideal situation, but in the interest of stability, it might make sense to maintain this sort of ANC-DA-IFP partnership. We are now coming up on the municipality where the DA will probably be in the greatest need of the ANC of all, and that is Ekurhuleni. If we take a look at the election polling here, the DA was the leader with 41%, so just 10% short of a 51% majority. Coming up second was the ANC with 19%, and then the EFF with 12%, and the MK party with 11%. Of course, the EFF and MK are the kinds of parties that the DA flat out refuses to work with, and I don't blame them. And so it really only leaves them with the option of working with the ANC. Now, of course, the DA could forego that route and instead work with smaller parties such as the IFP, Patriotic Alliance, ACDP, Freedom Front Plus, maybe even Action SA. But the problem with this is that depending on how the votes are split, it could mean building an 8 or 9 party coalition as they've done in the past. And these generally don't work out very well. After all, a lot of these small parties can be pretty entrepreneurial in nature, and if they aren't able to get the positions that they want, they pull out of the coalition. And so this is quite unstable. But if the DA and the ANC were to work together, well, that would actually create a 60% governing coalition, and then of course the IFP could come into play and strengthen that partnership even more. So ultimately, it seems as if in a place like Ekurhuleni, where the DA and its allies really aren't favored, a partnership with the ANC and perhaps by extension the IFP could be the most critical game changer that there is. Ultimately, for the DA to enter into a partnership with the ANC is far from ideal. We all understand the issues that come with dealing with parties like the ANC. However, at this moment in time, when you do have around 63% of the population voting for the ANC or EFF or MK, there really isn't much other choice. If the DA hopes to get their hands on the levers of power, they may have to repeat what they did in 2024, where they pick the least worst option. Still, if they are able to use their GPU partnership with the ANC and the IFP and really build a level of understanding with these parties, it could at least enable them to get their grips on power and affect change, so at least they'll be able to improve certain municipalities to some extent and even grow their popularity as a result. Still, I'm curious to hear what you think. Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more content and consider becoming a member. Your support is always appreciated. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.